This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm absolutely delighted that M.J. Akbar, who reads your introduction, has joined me in conversation today. We're going to begin by discussing Mr. Akbar's new book, After Me, Chaos, Astrology in the Mughal Empire. I'm holding up the book so you can take a good look at it. Excellent book. I read it from cover to cover. We're going to discuss this book, fascinating book as it is, but we're also going to discuss a couple of other issues on which Mr. Akbar has had a long interest and expertise. One, of course, is Pakistan, the other, the Middle East. Thank you, Mr. Akbar, for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Hindol.
I want to begin, sir, by talking about your book. And I want to ask you this idea or this story that you show us in so many countless almost examples in your book of the interest of Mughal emperors in astrology tells us something deeper about how the Mughals engaged with the country that they, in a sense, adopted, conquered, and then adopted, and also how they lost it. Because by the time we come to Aurangzeb, something else is going on. There is a trajectory. Even in to me, when I read your book, this interest in astrology almost is a metaphor for how the Mughals won and lost India, is it not?
Absolutely correct. You couldn't have put it better. And among other things, you've caught the, I think, essence of the book. But the most important element of this, apart from their interest in the astrology itself, which is quite remarkable. Since you've read book, you know how stunning the stories are in terms of their belief. But the important point, what might be called the intellectual spine of the book, is the fact that the Mughals did not confuse their culture with their religion. Culture is much older for all societies than their faith. And they were absolutely as loyal to their culture as they were to their religion. They didn't allow religion to subsume or consume their culture. I also believe that all societies which have loyalty or loyal to their culture integrate better, because culture is always a point of integration, right? You can't tell a Bengali Muslim not to speak Bengali. And Bengali is an expression of ancient reality, contemporary reality, and reality through the ages. It shapes the mind. So this fact, astrology was very much part of the Mughal tradition. I'm often asked, where did you find all this knowledge? This knowledge was staring you in your face. If you look at any at all these, as you realize that everything is from a primary source. And all you have to do is read the Akbarnama. You read the Humayun Nama, read the Jahangir, Tuzuki Jahangir, right? And you will find astrology on virtually living on every page. Why? Because, as they said over and over again, the astrology, belief in astrology went back to their traditions up to Genghis Khan. The other ancestor of theirs, which was Amir Taimur, they too believed in astrology. Sahib-i-Kiran, or Lord of the Conjunctions, was a title that Taimur took. There were astrologers in his court. Now, this merged and sort of married well with Indian thought and Indian reality and Indian culture. And it formed a bridge. People will get surprised, but after Akbar instituted a formal position for an astrologer, by the way, all of them had personal astrologers, all of them. After he turned this role of the astrologer into a formal position in court with the title of Jyotikrai or Jyotish Raja, right? For more than 100 years, their chief astrologer was a Brahmin from Varanasi. And all you see, all the astrologers' names have been recorded and kept. All their princes, Shah Shuja, who ruled Bengal for 23 years, he had a Bengali astrologer, Balabhadra. And this commitment, Humayun himself was an astrologer. It's very, people get astonished when they learn that because he saw the future himself, he predicted his own death, and he was perfectly healthy when he made the prediction. And the story is very fascinating. He was a bit addicted to opium, and every morning his staff or his servants would prepare opium pellets for him to consume. And while very much in the fashion as we have these days of preparing your daily dose of tablets morning and night, and putting them into boxes and pouches for the month, so his opium pellets were also being put in pouches, in trays. And he told his servant that don't don't prepare my opium pellets for the 8th day, because it will not be needed. And on the morning of the 7th day, he announced that a great tragedy will befall today in the afternoon. And of course, he slipped. He used to wear his dresses, the color of his dresses, and this will be familiar to those who see politicians today. The color of his dresses matched the color of the zodiac for the day. His carpets, I mean, his whole decor was, and he believed very strongly that you must remember that Akbar was born at a time when the Mughal Empire had perished. After 10 years, Humayun was driven out of the whole of the Mughal space in the north of India by Sher Shah. And his brothers in Afghanistan were even more eager to kill Humayun and his family than Sher Shah was. So it was not it is not a age known for kindness when it came to power. I suppose no age is when it comes to power. But he was absolutely, and when he reached Amarkot, and he enters, he didn't get succor, or he didn't get sanctuary in Amarkot out of any particular kindness. He got it because the Rana of Amarkot actually hired him and his men as mercenaries. And after, when he reached the fortress, and his wife was, heavily pregnant at that time, but he would not enter the fort until the next day, because both their astrologers had decided the auspicious moment for entering the fortress had not come. Then comes the story of Akbar's birth, which is unbelievable. But the first volume of Akbarnama, printed, the Harvard edition, which I am referring to, but translated by Thaxton Wheeler, a very good scholar. The 70%, 75% of the first volume is just about horoscopes and about stories about his birth. That was the kind of depth of belief. So when Akbar was being born, and Hamida Begum inside Amarkot, suddenly it was announced. Humayun left, by the way, to go to battle in Thatta, and he had to take every single male in his entourage with him to do the fighting. The only person he left behind was his astrologer, Maulana Chand, and he was a Maulana. They were Muslim astrologers. The timing of, for example, Akbar's coronation was determined by one of the great astrologers of the time, Imam Ghaznavi, and he was an Imam. So astrologers were in all religions, including Muslim astrologers. So Maulana Chand was left behind, and his only responsibility was that he had to record the most accurate, exact second virtually of the birth of the child, because the Humayun did not want any disputes about the horoscope. Now suddenly there was a stir in the household, and he heard that Hamida Bano had begun her labor pains. And this Maulana Chand went berserk. He went frantic. He started shouting, "The child can't be born now. The child can't be born now." And the women started laughing at him and said, "Get away, get out of the way. Once nature's call begins, who can stop it? You have no idea. Just get out." But something seized him. He announced that 5 hours later, there will come a moment in the constellation of the stars that has not come in 1,000 years. And only a child born at that particular moment would become the Chakravarti or would become a great emperor whose name would enter world history. But the labor had started, and so what he did, there was a little sort of hesitant to say this, but there was not a very good looking maidservant, a dai perhaps, sitting there. And in the darkness, he suddenly caught her by the scruff of the neck and rushed to the Hamida Banu's bed where she was in labor and shoved this woman's face through the curtain and into the expecting mother's face. And Hamida Banu got so shocked, so frightened that the labor pain stopped. And then Akbar was born at precisely the moment that the astrologer wanted the child to be born.
So
And
some
you know
was
the rest of the
interest in
story.
astrology that actually an emperor's birth was, the labor pains had to be, externally deferred so that the next emperor, so to speak, could be born at the right moment and fulfill his manifest assuming destiny.
Absolutely. And this is again, and this is said, by the way, narrated by Abul Fazl in a very matter-of-fact way. In the same matter-of-fact way, he lauds his ancestors, the family ancestors from Genghis Khan's side, the mother goddess, Alankoa, without any hesitation and with great reverence that we come from her loins. And there again is a virgin birth myth which he attributes to ancestors before Genghis Khan. So, as I said, this multiculturalism, this belief that perhaps there are other realities in life, made them, provided a point of integration which became part of their policy approaches. I'll give you another story that to explain what the level of influence. At one level, of course, it was horoscopes, it was moments, what is auspicious, what is not auspicious, what is the time for coronation, as I mentioned, Akbar's coronation, which was after Panipat and not with a ceremony, because it literally outside the battlefield that he was crowned. But when at the height of his power, the rift had begun with the Sultan of Kashmir, which till then was independent. And the plans were made by the court to invade Kashmir and take it. And there was a dispute among the high officials. I think Raja Man Singh had one view, and Abul Fazl says that he definitely was on the side of immediate invasion. But there was a very strong view that the year had already gone beyond summer, and any army now moving, it would take time to cross the mountains. The mountains would be snowed up, and therefore it was better to wait till the thaw. A very reasonable bit of assessment. But those others who have wanted an immediate invasion didn't want to wait for a year. Eventually, Akbar said, let the dispute be resolved by the astrologer. And the astrologer said, the moment is auspicious now, go ahead. And this continued right through since there is mention of Kashmir, Aurangzeb was the one who hid his faith in astrology.
That's right.
But he too, he had two coronations, one after defeating Dara Shikoh and one after defeating one brother and the other after defeating his other brothers. And at both times, astrologers delayed the coronation till the right time for a few weeks on end at a time of tension. But they would not do anything without checking with the stars.
And in a sense, when Aurangzeb moved away from this worldview, should I call it, and I mean, the most famous, in a sense, the phrase that you use, also the title of your book, after me chaos, right? I mean, this we have heard in the past also, this famous statement that, in a
By the
sense,
way, I must correct you immediately.
yeah,
Please do not buy into the canard that some Louis said this first. Aurangzeb said this 80 years before Louis.
that's right. No,
Right?
Aurangzeb only. I guess because I from Calcutta, I
I
guess
know.
I am
After me, the deluge
said this.
was said
Yeah, that's
much later.
no, I don't know who this Louis. In fact, funnily enough, I don't even know which Louis you're referring to. But I looked this up. But I also remember that hearing that Aurangzeb said that, in a sense that after him chaos comes. So the decline begins when this worldview begins to, in a sense, totter.
Absolutely. And Aurangzeb ruined the empire by a return to bigotry. Akbar was only 22 years old when he removed jizya. He said, and not only that, there were taxes on temple entry. In Varanasi, wherever he heard of discrimination in the name of religion, he removed it. As usual, his accountants would come and say, you lose so much revenue. And he says, an empire, a kingdom is not ruled by revenue alone. It is ruled by the goodwill of the people. And in any case, we must do what is right. And this was reversed by the last of the 6 Mughals. And the moment Aurangzeb did that, something immediately, that relationship with the Indian people, and to beginning with the Indian ruling class, let's be clear, because tax was paid only by the rich. But that relationship of trust immediately cracked. Once that cracked, in many senses, the Mughal Empire was a Mughal Rajput Empire. It was the alliances that were built with the Rajputs, which built by Akbar through many forms of political alliances, personal alliances, which held the empire together. And that Aurangzeb broke apart willfully, deliberately, consciously, because he had what might be called in today's terminology, a fundamentalist view of his faith, a supremacist view of his faith, quite in contrast to his ancestors, to his great-grandfather, who believed in equal space for everyone, or space for everyone, even if you don't want to use the word equal. Let everyone worship in whichever way they found. But the story about After Me Chaos is very fascinating. Aurangzeb imprisoned all his sons at one time or the other. Finally, he was 80 years old when he summoned his eldest son, who became Bahadur Shah, from prison after 8 years in prison, and said that, look, I'm 80 years old, long past the sell-by date of people at that time. And I've decided that I think you are the only one who's worthy enough to be my successor. And this conversation has been recorded. There is no, by the way, history of Aurangzeb in his authorized history, but his history has been written by others. And what is definitely there are his correspondence, his edicts, his conversations, a record of which has been kept and was translated by Sir Jadunath Sarkar. So it is from Sir Jadunath's translation that I have got all this and his history. And so, he calls his son and he says that, look, now let me tell you things that nobody knows. I'm 80 years old. I was the third son. I had no chance of becoming emperor. My Dara Shikoh, my eldest brother, was my father's favorite. He was the designated heir. And if something had happened to Dara, then my other brother, Shah Shuja, who I have mentioned, who ruled Bengal for 23 years, he was very capable as a ruler, very capable. And he would have been. But I always knew as a child, from childhood, that I would be the emperor. Why? Because the horoscope that was written at my birth said that I would be the successor. And he says, every single thing written in my horoscope has come out to be true. Then, I'm cutting a long story short, and then he says, now let me tell you the bad news. Today, the empire extends from Badakhshan, which is now next to Tajikistan, right? From Badakhshan right up to Kerala. Not the whole of Kerala, but part of Kerala. He says, very rarely has there been an empire as big as this, right? This is at the height of its power and its glory. But let me tell you, within a few years after my death, this whole edifice, this whole empire will crumble. There will be chaos. And that is precisely what happened. That too is unbelievable. That is exactly what happened. And, that person who wrote his horoscope, he was a Muslim vizier. Aurangzeb appointed him his vizier, principal vizier, for 3 years before he died. So, I mean, that faith in astrology, you see, Jahangir, very little is done. Tuzuke Jahangir, which is very good reading, by the way. It is, I mean, it's a natural acceptance that astrology is a normal part of life. There is the famous, I think, book on princes written by an Indian who is now an American academic, Faruqi, who says in Princes of the Mughal Empire that the daily routine, the first thing that the princes had to do, I mean, however much they drank the previous night, they had to get up in the morning. And the first thing that was done, when you were dressed in the formal, ornate dresses of rulers of that time, he said the first council of the day was held while the prince was being dressed. Any prince, anywhere. Most of them became governors at very early age, 14, 13, 15. They were given an appanage and they were trained to rule. And he says that when they were being dressed, in that first morning meeting, there had to be 2 astrologers, because they would determine whom it was auspicious to meet and at what time. It is very much part of daily life in them. And I think that resonated very well with the culture of India. And as I said, formed psychological bridges with the people.
As I read your book and as I came towards the end of the book, it occurred to me that many of the things that you point out, in a sense, the deficiencies that you point out, which brought an end to Mughal rule in India, in a sense, the strains, if I can call them that, of those deficiencies, triggered Pakistan. And the fact that Pakistan remains in many ways an insufficiently, to use Salman Rushdie's word, an insufficiently imagined country. Perhaps some people may say it is over-imagined, but insufficiently imagined in many structural ways. The same deficiencies have been passed on. And in fact, even today, Pakistan's behavior towards India, Pakistan's own anxieties, Pakistan's inability to sort of bring together a contextual nationhood, so to speak. It's all, in a sense, the deficiencies are the same. And I wondered if you would reflect upon it.
Well, why is Pakistan a dysfunctional state? For many reasons. One of the reasons is because it refuses to accept that its culture is older than its faith. I mean, how can you live in Pakistan and not recognize that the Indus Valley civilization or the Mohenjo-daro civilization is part of your tradition? It's an absurdity. So it's basically a country without a history. It's a land that has abandoned its own wujud, its own soul, and tried to adopt and what I would even call an artificial rationale. Pakistan was built on a very interesting theory that emanated in the middle of the 18th century, the theory of distance. It was basically born out of what I have described elsewhere as the romance of regression, that you have become so insecure that you create an artificial past and you cling on to it. Anyway, in the nub of it lies the view, this theory of distance, that the further you are from Hindus, the closer you will get to the revival of quote unquote Islamic strength. And it was a very strange phenomenon, but it became elected. And in political terms, that theory of distance was used by the British, who were past masters at evil, right? The colonial empire, into creation of separate electorates. All those, by the way, who talk of democracy under British rule, you should advise them very strongly not to talk utter balderdash and nonsense. There was no democracy because that democracy had separate electorates. That means only Muslims could vote for Muslims. It is an amazing. Never in the history of the world is there such a. Number two, there was no vote the vote was only given to 9 or 10% of the people, the ratepayers. So only an oligarchy of the rich could vote. So the whole Muslim League phenomenon, which itself, even in 46, which they claim as the basis of Pakistan, the Muslim League never won in Punjab, never won the election in Punjab. But in any case, that was a very nefarious story. But this idea of partition actually gathers strength from this theory of distance. You must remember that the creators of Pakistan never fought for independence from British. They fought for freedom from Hindus. That is why they created a nation in the name of Islam. Now, Islam has never been the basis of anyone's nationalism because Islam is an international, universal faith. Islam lives in a mosque, not in a nation. If Islam had been sufficient as a basis of nationalism, of basis of a nation, why would there be 22 Arab countries? When Aurangzeb imposed jizya, when Aurangzeb became again a bitter and a vitriolic ruler, Shivaji wrote a very powerful letter, which I think, which I have mentioned, not think, I have mentioned in detail in the book.
Yeah.
And that letter needs to be understood because that letter has more understanding of true Islam than Aurangzeb's behavior. Because Shivaji points out, well, how is Allah described in the Quran? Allah is described as Rabbul Alameen, that means Lord of the whole universe, God of the whole universe. He's not described as Rabbul Muslim, as a God of only Muslims. So the God of the Quran created Hindol as much as he created me. And if we are both his creations, why are we fighting over him? Let us all. There is another ayat in the Quran which actually confirms the multiculturalism. Because God says in the Quran that I have sent the message in every language. But these verses don't occur to people who are determined to be bigots, people who are determined to separate people, ordinary people in the name of religion. They will not use verses that unify people. They will not remember that the Quran says, Lakum dinakum wa iliya din, your faith for you and my faith for me. What else is our constitution except an expression of that freedom? Your faith for you, my faith for me. That's it. But this, right, moment, the previous Mughal rulers remembered this, Akbar on Humayun onwards. And Aurangzeb abandoned it. And because he abandoned it, there was chaos. There was 100 years of chaos, a chaos which eventually was sorted out by the British.
No, Mr. Akbar, if you would reflect a bit on what is in Pakistan, in a sense, as Pakistan, many people believe that, in a sense, Pakistan is disintegrating. And of course, one could argue that it has already disintegrated once before with the breakaway of Bangladesh. But a lot of people believe today that, in some senses, it's disintegrating again. Look at what's happening in Balochistan. Look at what's happening in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and so on and so forth. Look at what's happening across the border with Pakistan versus Afghanistan. When you see Pakistan today, considering what we saw in Operation Sindoor and comments by this now Field Marshal Asim Munir that comes again and again, talk to me a little bit about how you see the chaos that seems to be erupting in Pakistan and what it means for South Asia in general, for the Indian subcontinent.
But when you say about the disintegration of Pakistan, I have a problem because it was never integrated. It was an artificial construction. That is why it could not last even 10 years. It could not create institutions. It was not India which interfered with Pakistan's inability to create institutions. It could not find a political construct by which it could keep its people together. You mentioned Bangladesh. Within 2 decades, it lost Bangladesh. When a country needs an army to create a government within less than 10 years of its existence, what does it prove? It proves it's a dysfunctional state. I described in my book, Tinderbox, that Pakistan was a jelly state. Butter will melt. Jelly will not melt and disappear. So Pakistan will not disappear, but it will always quiver. It will always be unstable. And because it has terrorism and nuclear capability, and nuclear arms capability, it will be a toxic jelly state. Its toxicity is not going to be restricted just to its so-called mortal enemy, which is India. You can see that Pakistan cannot be at peace even with Afghanistan. Afghanistan may have an Islamic government, but Afghanistan's rulers have a deep nationalist commitment and culture, which goes back centuries and millennia. Right?
I believe, and you will obviously expand on this, I believe there is this famous thing in Pashtun Valley that we've been Pashtuns for 5,000 years, we've only been Muslims for 1,300 years, which the Pashtuns famously supposedly have said to the Pakistanis.
Absolutely right. It's a perfect quotation because, as I said in the very beginning, culture and identity are older than faith. Faith, our religion, is one aspect of our identity. It is not the total aspect of our identity. I'm an Indian. I'm a Muslim. How can I say that Sanskrit is not part of my culture? And as I said, the Quran itself says that I have sent a message in every language. So why can't God send a message in Sanskrit? Right? What it means essentially is that don't divide, assimilate, accept that the Creator created everything. And once you accept that, then you don't turn religion into a force for partitions. And I think Pakistan, Jinnah, who turned this theory of distance from the 1930s into the demand for separation, he destroyed many things, but the greatest damage Jinnah did was to the Muslims of the subcontinent. And this is not recognized very easily, but that's the actual fact. Pakistan is a state which is going to be held together by military rubber bands, if you like, military sellotape, if you like, the military gun, if you like, right? But it cannot hold together as a civilian nation state. It is going to be, you need military adhesive to keep it together, but that is a temporary phase in history.
I want to move on to the Middle East. This is the last part of our conversation, Mr. Akbar, but I have one last question on Pakistan. The condition that you described, I would like you to reflect on what it means for India, because many people believe that, in a sense, this rubber band state, this jelly state, is turning out to be a consistent, and especially now with its interaction with China, it is consistently becoming an impediment in many ways to India's, growth and manifest destiny.
I think, under Prime Minister Modi, we had a very remarkable reinvention of neighborhood policy, which unfortunately has not been recognized sufficiently. Prime Minister Modi redefined the meaning of neighbor. If you remember, the historical or conventional meaning of neighbor was best expressed that, what do we do? We can change everything, but you can't change your neighbor. Prime Minister Modi has shown that you can change your neighbor. How? By redefining neighbor. Neighbor is no longer a question of distance, or is demarcated by distance. Neighbor is now demarcated by reach. If I don't reach you, you are not my neighbor. Today, there are 1,000 flights every week to and from the Gulf. Right? I was in Malaysia recently. There is an airline which flies to virtually every city in India. Right? There are two airlines. You can connect to any part of India. Indonesia, now, who is my neighbor? Is the Gulf my neighbor, or is Pakistan my neighbor? There's not a single flight to Pakistan. And if there was, you probably wouldn't be able to get passengers. The Gulf is my neighbor, and both Gulf and Pakistan are Muslims, so there's nothing to do with religion. So this is a management of a toxic presence in our neighborhood, which we have to sort out through a combination of military means and diplomatic distance. We've always wise to remember old and often forgotten Bismarck, who said that an invading army at your doorstep will not be stopped by eloquence, right? So you need a very strong military affirmation. By the way, one of the people who said this over and over again, you might be surprised, was Mahatma Gandhi, apostle of non-violence. 1 week after the first terrorist invasion in modern history, which was Pakistan's export of terrorism to try and snatch Kashmir, that same last day of October, Gandhiji had a meeting with Mountbatten, and which Gandhiji said he heard all the details by then. And he told Mountbatten that, yes, it is very correct to send the Indian army out against them, because the nation state has to be protected. And after that meeting, Mountbatten said, this man is sounding like Winston Churchill. That day at the prayer meeting, Gandhiji said that the Indian soldiers must be ready to die. This is their valor, their heroism, because they have a nation to protect. So this need that, yes, we need to protect our nation from invasion, from aggression, from terrorism. You mentioned this false, field marshal, this fake field marshal who was abruptly bumped up because the present civilian government needs to survive by an equation with the army, right? His speech, which was a prelude to terrorist attack. You must read that speech. That is a speech of a supremacist who says that we are superior to everyone else. When I was in Europe on that mission sent by our Prime Minister, this is what I argued. I said, we have not come here to explain that this is yet another of ordinary terrorism or familiar terrorism. After all, 24 people have died, which is extremely tragic. And you must always remember that we will not accept two laws. That when you have terrorism, you can do what you like, but when India has terrorism, we must be patient. right? For us, an Indian life is as precious as any other life, right? But this terrorism that happened, you must understand its nature. It was fascism. Because the moment you strip a man in order to find out his religion and then shoot, then you're not merely a killer, you're an ethnic cleanser. You're indulging in fascist ethnic cleansing of the kind that Nazis did. And Europe, of all places, must understand that. And he said very clearly that we have to do this wherever you live in the world. So today, it may be our country, tomorrow it will be Bradford. That is the danger of these fascist policies that are now becoming the formal policy of Pakistan. They're no longer hiding it.
You mentioned the Middle East. I want to move there, and that's another part of the world, Mr. Akbar, you've looked at with great, attention for many, many years. I want to ask you to reflect a little bit about what's really going on there. I mean, now that Trump brokered some sort of deal seems to have happened between Israel and Hamas. How do you see that panning out? And indeed, the second part of the question, how do you see our relationship, India's relationship, changing over time with the region, especially between Palestine and Israel?
Unfortunately, in that region, peace is a comma between wars. That has been the story ever since the Balfour Declaration, right? Sometimes the comma becomes a semicolon, but there is no full stop. Much as I would wish for peace, much as I would dream of peace, like any other human being, the last thing that I can bear is terrorism succeed or children being killed, as happened in Gaza, and there are many thousands. I think no sane person could ever accept either reality. But that is a war whose brutality uh, can barely be described by historians. It has roots. It's a compound of many factors, and of lately, most important, the evil of colonial policy. That we are reaping the harvest, a bitter harvest, as one of the famous books in the region is concerned. Our relations, I think, peaked about 5 years ago. There has been a bit of stasis since then. But these ups and downs can always be corrected by diplomacy, by further engagement. But I think the Gulf understands that the future lies with a nation state like India, because India is a modern nation state. It cannot lie with a medieval idea, however much that medieval idea might seem attractive on the surface. But one thing I must say, you've used the term Middle East. Uh, I want to put a question to you. Which part of the East is it in the middle of?
You're right. I mean, I've been just reading this very interesting comment that if the Gulf is the Middle East, then England is the Middle West, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, the only country in the middle of the East is India.
Right.
That is West Asia. We must get our geographical definitions right. Otherwise, we will still be seeing the world through the sieve and through the spectacles of colonialism. And it's not a small thing. We need to correct perspectives in order to find balance. The encouraging part of that region is that many countries there have realized that they must become normal parts of the world, in which economic investment, turning urban areas into areas of convivial living, including, if you want to turn a place into a tourist spot, you cannot make it hostile to any faith. So I think one of the great achievements of the Modi government and happened was persuading the UAE to permit a temple. And they've done it now, and they're very happy about it, because they understood the meaning of giving space to everyone to live there. So I think there is a lot of, we have to look at these things in terms of the long-term perspective. And I am definitely far more optimistic than I would have been 10 years ago.
Wonderful. On that very optimistic note, Mr. Akbar, thank you very much for your time. Just want to hold up your book one more time before we say goodbye to you. After Chaos, Astrology in the Mughal Empire, Mr. Akbar's new book. Thanks very much, Mr. Akbar, for your time. As always, really enjoy talking to you. As always, wonderful perspectives. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Hindol.